Good afternoon. Welcome back. You have such a treat in store. Gregg is here, and oh my goodness, are you going to have some fun this afternoon? By the way, how's your future looking? Awesome. Thank you. I mentioned Barbara and vocational arousal. Anybody interested? Anybody already there? Well, one of the wonderful things here, how many of you are already familiar with and excited about and grateful to Gregg for the gifts that he has brought into the world? So there's another wonderful example of being passionate, and we were just talking about his commitment. Look at the years coming from an engineering background, working with Cisco systems when they were building the foundation of the internet, and then transitioning into now being a bridge between the science and the magic and the power of healing consciousness, all that we really are. Oh, by the way, how many spiritual beings are there in the room? Cool. Just checking to see if I went at the right place. In the journey, paradigm shift, when your conception of the reality that you're dealing with, or a particular area, but particularly with reality, when a reality shifts so profoundly that you get an entirely new perspective, and where that becomes important is where it makes a difference in your life. One of the gifts that Gregg brings, coming from the science background, is the practical application, looking for the real, verifiable information and making it applicable. And as we worked last night, as you designing your future and connecting to your future, and as we'll do, we'll have if you didn't get the materials, and if you sign up on that sheet on the future visioning packet, it's still available. We'll do the seminar on Tuesday afternoon to talk about your future and to continue that discussion, and to look at the shifts that are happening in you. The shift of relating to the future is the paradigm shift that changed the whole course of my life. Gregg is going to bring this afternoon some paradigm shifts that literally thought processes that have existed in the human world for sometimes thousands of years. And there's new discoveries, particularly some of the ways that, when I heard him last week in Los Angeles, the shift that's happening that we can understand is so profound. So you have a whole new perspective on some of the fundamental, in his new book, the fundamental shifts that help us understand our reality. And so he'll be giving you this afternoon an opportunity to understand the real truth about how our reality works and who we really are. And with the purpose we were just talking a moment ago about creating a world that works for everyone. He was talking about peace. And he mentioned where boundaries are no longer an impediment. And as he said it, it was so cool, because the way he said it, he wasn't just talking about boundaries between countries, which so many cause, but I never heard it before until he said it just a minute ago, where boundaries are no longer an impediment. And I realized that that's talking about the boundaries between us, where those are no longer an impediment, if we could see each other as the beautiful spiritual beings that we really are. So speaking of beautiful, spiritual, empowered beings, if you wouldn't mind, stand. And let's welcome Gregg.
Hi is how I say your name. 100%, right? I want to know you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Test 1, 2. Thank you. Wow, it feels really good to be on this stage with you today. I would say hello, Toronto, but I know a whole lot of people in this room are not from Toronto. So I'll just say hello, world. Well, are you as happy to be here as I am to be here? I don't know. You'd have to be pretty happy to be happier than I am right now. This conference started yesterday. This is my first time with you. And I apologize. I wasn't here yesterday. I had a family emergency with my mom. Mom needed me yesterday, and I'm here for you today. So I am so honored to be sharing this stage with some amazing people. Ty, thank you. Where'd you go? Thank you for my introduction today and for all the work that you do. He came to see me in Los Angeles last week and came here again to see me anyway. So thank you. Colin, I heard you. I told Colin I had his back covered, literally, because I listened to him from behind that curtain today. So I had your back before, and I had your back today. John Major Jenkins, isn't John amazing? Yesterday morning, our paths crossed at the airport last night, so he's not here today. So what I'd like to do is to anchor the continuity of this day in a way that carries us beyond simply knowing, that gives us the opportunity to apply what we know. If you're in this room right now, I know that you know this is no ordinary time in the history of our planet. It's no ordinary time in the history of our civilization. It's no ordinary time in the history of Canada or the United States or any country you come from. And it's no accident that so many crises are unfolding in our lives right now. It's only a surprise to the Western way of thinking, because our indigenous ancestors have been telling us for about 5,000 years we could expect some big change coming our way. And what I'd like to do is dovetail with where John Major Jenkins left off and the message from Colin and Ty, and bring that together. Then we've got a very special guest coming this afternoon and some deep experience this afternoon. So with your permission, what I'd like to do, let me do a little bit of left brain stuff first that moves us into our right brain and our hearts. Are you okay if we do it that way? And I'm going to share with you why. Because even if you are the most right brain person on the planet, your left brain is always working. And if we do not address our left brain, it's always in there. If I come in and say, okay, move into your heart and do this, your left brain's saying, how come? And how do you know it works? And how long am I supposed to do it? And how come nobody else is doing it like I'm doing it? Your left brain's always chattering. And when we understand, when the facts are clear, the choices become obvious, and no one needs to tell us what to do. And that's the way I would like to honor our time together today. How many are taking notes, planning on taking notes? I'm looking at all these notebooks poised. Well, good luck. I know that some people learn really well, very kinesthetic. You learn better when you take your notes. And I appreciate that. And if you need to do that, that's fine. But I'm going to invite you to consider these next 2 hours is just a couple of friends together in a living room. Okay, this is our living room. We're friends, and this is a conversation. In a conversation, you do not explain every iota of detail to get to the point. And that's the way I'd like to think of this today, rather than thinking of this as a lecture or a workshop where we have to go through every iota of every detail. We're going to cover some huge concepts just like we would in a conversation, because we're going somewhere. We've got to get somewhere with this program. Sheena, are you in the room here? There you are, right there. I want to begin by acknowledging this woman right here. Sheena, there are a lot of reasons for her to not have done this program this weekend. It would have been a lot easier for her to have not done this program. A lot of logistics, if you can imagine the logistics of bringing in people and speakers and coordinating the events from all over the world to make this happen. And Sheena had a very clear vision, and that vision, coupled with her dedication, her passion, her perseverance, and just the personality that makes Sheena Sheena, is why we are here today. So can you help me give a warm welcome to Sheena for making this happen? Yeah. Thank you. And I know that Sheena has a whole staff of people that I haven't even met. So whoever you are and wherever you are, I want to thank you for that opportunity as well. Sheena, now I have 2 hours from when I start, so we started about 5 after, so I'm going to go until for that 2 hours, okay? All right, here we go. I think the best place to begin is at the very beginning. If you're like me, you want to know why we're doing what we're doing. I have a new book that was released this last week. It's not the reason that I'm here. But the title of the book is called Deep Truth. And I'm going to share some of those deep truths with you. And when people hear that title, one of the first things they ask is, where does that title come from? So I want to be very clear with you why I've chosen that title. It comes from a direct quote from a brilliant physicist in the mid-20th century. His name was Niels Bohr. He was a colleague of Albert Einstein. And it was during an informal conversation that Niels Bohr was having with Albert Einstein in the mid-20th century that he made a statement. And it's one of those statements I have to wonder if even he knew how profound his statement was when he made it. Here's the statement. Niels Bohr said this. He said, quote, "It is the hallmark of any deep truth that its negation is also a deep truth." Now, the first time I saw this, I thought, wow, that's really deep. It is. What does it mean? Here's what it means. He and Albert Einstein were having a conversation about science. They were saying that science is built on deep truths that have been accepted in some cases for 300 years. Science began about 300 years ago during the time of Isaac Newton. This is when we say the birth of science and the scientific method began. So they were talking about the deep truths of science. And Niels Bohr said, when new discoveries overturn the existing beliefs that we held as deep truths, then the new discoveries become the new deep truths. Now, why am I sharing that with you now? Why is that the title of the book? Why is that important? Here's the reason why. The best minds of our time are telling us in no uncertain terms that you and I are living the greatest number of crises and the greatest magnitude of crises ever to face 5,000 years of recorded human history. Never in the recorded history of our planet have so many crises converged in such a small window of time. Now, the good news is that new scientific discoveries give us the way to solve those crises. Not just to solve them, to get through them, but transcend them, to become better people and have a better world when we finish. So the new discoveries are there. Those new discoveries are peer-reviewed in the scientific journals. However, here's the flip side. They are not being allowed. They're not being accepted in mainstream media, mainstream documentaries, mainstream classrooms, mainstream textbooks. Mainstream teachers are not allowed to share many of the new discoveries. That means that your young people, and if you are one of those that's trying to solve these problems, it means that we're being asked to solve the greatest problems, the greatest crises of our survival with the false assumptions that led to the problems in the first place. This is precisely what's happening today. So I'd like to share what these new discoveries are all about, and that's what we're going to do. That is why the new deep truths that are replacing the old truths of science are so powerful. So if you, like me, you want to know where we're going, we're going to talk about the breakdown, the systems that are breaking down, that are creating the crises of our world today. They're linked to cycles of time. I know John Major Jenkins spoke about this a little bit. I'm going to pick up where he left off. I'm going to share with you some of the false assumptions of science. Now, some of you know me. I was trained as a scientist. I worked in the corporations through the science and the technical levels. I was a geologist for Phillips Petroleum in the 1970s energy crisis. During the last years of the Cold War, I worked behind the scenes in the defense industry writing software for nuclear missiles. That was my job. And it led me on a path to search into our past for the reasons that would help me understand why we never have to have that kind of war again. In 1990, I was the first technical operations manager for Cisco Systems. It was during the early years of the internet. So I come from a scientific perspective, a scientific background, But I'm also very clear that science doesn't have all the answers. Science is good, but science can only serve us if we keep science honest. And it is not honest to teach false assumptions of science when new discoveries that are peer-reviewed, they're not just random discoveries, these are peer-reviewed in the technical journals. Those new discoveries are not being reflected in the mainstream media, classrooms, and textbooks. That means we're teaching things that are no longer scientific by definition. I'd like to share with you what those new deep truths are. It wouldn't do any good to talk about all of them if we couldn't do something about it. So we will do something together, something profound in here as a group. And we will join with people all over the world by the time we close this afternoon to share our new discoveries together. You okay if we do it this way for the next couple of hours? Does that make sense? Okay, good. It is not our imagination. The best minds of our time are in fact telling us that we are living a world of crisis. Okay? We are living what many are calling a perfect storm. It is a rare convergence. I'm going to say hi to this side of the room. We're living a rare convergence of natural cycles of the earth. Natural cycles of the earth, and I'm going to talk about these in just a few minutes and share with you precisely what I mean by natural cycles of the earth. But it's natural changes in the earth that are now pushing the way that we think and the way that we live to the limits. And as we reach those limits, the perception is that things are broken. I just mentioned I was with my mom. I left her yesterday to come here to be with you. And Mom asked me, she said, where are you going? And I told her, Toronto. And she said, what are you going to talk about? And I told her. And she said, oh, that. Because she's heard me say this for 30 years. She said, what can you say that you haven't already said? And I'm going to give you a direct quote from my mom. This is my 4'8" tall mom. Here's a direct quote. She said, what can you say? The world is going to hell in a handbasket, and that's all there is to it. Now, I'm sharing my mom's quote because I hear similar ideas throughout the world. I was just in Western Europe. We were just in South America a month ago. Everywhere, people feel like things are falling apart at the seams. And if we do not understand the mechanism that's driving the change, it's easy to think the world's going to hell in a handbasket. It's easy to think things are simply breaking for no apparent reason. When we understand the mechanism, all of a sudden things take on a whole different perspective. Now, the cycles that are driving the change. When I was in school, back in the 60s and 70s, and I know many of you in school, when you were in school, I always believed that Earth didn't move very much. You know, I knew as a kid, I knew that we had the 24-hour spin, you know, night and day, and we had the seasons, and I didn't think about much more than that. We now know that Earth is a very dynamic system. Earth's location in space is what is triggering the changes in the world that are triggering the changes in the way we live, that are triggering the changes in the way you and I think about ourselves and our relationship to the world. Earth's position in space, the orbit of Earth, the tilt, the angle, the wobble. Now, there are many places in the next 2 hours where one topic could be the whole program. And this is one of those places. So I'm not going to go into these in tremendous detail. What I want you to know is that Earth's location in space changes on a rhythmic basis. Some of the changes happen over periods of time that are so vast. Nobody living today was living when the change began. Our ancestors did their best to tell us that these changes were coming. And it's so interesting to me as I have traveled, I've been on every continent in the last 5 years. It's only here in the modern world in the West that we're surprised by the changes. It's like the great secret everybody knows except us. Because of the way we've been led to think of our relationship to the world. Science now is bearing out the fact of the changes. Okay, and our indigenous ancestors told us in non-scientific terms that these changes were happening. Now, just to give you an idea of what kinds of changes I'm talking about. I'm going to get into this more at the end of the program, but I wanted to share this with you right now. This is a little a chart. It was put together by Institute of Heart Math, and we're going to talk about them a lot at the end of the program today. What you're seeing on the bottom graph at the top, the bottom, the red line, this is the rise and fall, the ebb and flow of solar cycles, sunspot cycles, from the year 1750 all the way to the year 1920. And all I want you to see from this is, can you see a rhythm? Yes, no. Can you see a rhythm here? Okay, the sunspot cycles, they ebb and flow, and our own science now is telling us that there's a direct relationship between our relationship to the sun and humans. When sunspot cycles are high, there's a lot of social, translates into a lot of social energy. It can be social unrest, or it can be the catalyst for really powerful, positive, beautiful change. So the sunspot energy isn't good or bad. It's an impulse of energy. How we use it, what it means to us, that is something that we determine. So this is the ebb and the flow of that energy from 1750 until 1920. Now I'm going to show you another graph of the ebb and flow of great human activities, human experiences. Some of these are war, some of them are peace. Some of them are innovations in science and art and music and technology. And you tell me if you see a correlation. So the blue line will be the human activity as it correlates to the sunspot activity. It's not exact, but you can certainly say there's a correlation there. We are influenced by these powerful forces of solar energy, among others. There are many others. I'm only isolating one to give you an example of how Earth's position in space changes our relationship to the sun, to the center of the Milky Way galaxy. John Jenkins talked about it yesterday. I know. He always does. That's how I know, even though I wasn't here. I know he did. I'm channeling John Major Jenkins right now. Oh, I can't channel that part. Okay. So what you can see is there's a relationship. Can you all see that from where you are? Why is that important today? Here is why it's important today. We just finished solar cycle 22 and 23, and we're beginning solar cycle 24. At the peak of solar cycle 23, profound changes began upon the earth. At the peak of solar cycle 24, an event that forever changed our planet occurred. And at the very beginning of solar cycle, 22, 23, we're now in 24. At the beginning of 24, you're going to see something profound is happening. Okay, I'm going to clean this up so you can see a little bit better. Can you see this right here? Right in the middle of solar cycle 22, look at what happened right here. This is when Iraq invaded Kuwait. It doesn't mean something bad must happen. It means that people feel this impulse. A lot of it can translate to social unrest, or it can translate into powerful social change and peace. It can. Right in the middle of solar cycle 23, look what happened. 9/11. Right in the middle. And then something mysterious happened. The sun went very quiet for a year. For most of 2010, the scientists were amazed, because the sun was very still, very quiet. All of a sudden, it began when? Does anybody here know? When did it begin again? January of 2011. What happened in January of 2011? I heard it over here. Exactly, and here it is. Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, right at the first impulse of the new solar cycle. And why am I sharing this with you now? It's to share with you that while change is possible anytime, that the deck is stacked in our favor. The deck is stacked in our favor. The scales are easier for us to tip in our favor of peace and life and balance now as this new wave of energy sweeps the earth, and it happens to coincide precisely with the year that this conference is all about. Isn't that interesting? Probably just a coincidence, wouldn't you imagine? I think it's probably just a coincidence. Think about this. If solar cycle 24 that we're in now, if it had gone off according to schedule, we would have missed that 2012 window. But for some reason, the sun went quiet for about a year. And when it began, You can see what happened. You all probably know, I mean, you've all heard during a full moon cycle, during a full moon, there are more traffic accidents, more emergency hospital room visits, more violent crimes. Those are some of the bad things. But good things happen. If you're an artist or a musician, that's when some of the best songs are written. On a full moon, if I know it's a full moon, I won't even try to go to sleep because I know I'm going to be wired all night. I'm going to sit up. I'm going to play my guitar. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to do something. It can happen in the night because that energy is so powerful. It's a gift. It's about the way that we use it. So I'm sharing this with you now to let you know, in addition to all the other things that are happening, we are being gifted with a powerful impulse that is scientifically confirmed to have effects upon the way we live in this world. Solar cycles affect heart rate. They affect our nervous system. They affect ovulation cycles. Ladies know that. They affect social cycles. So we're living a very, very powerful time right now, beginning of solar cycle 24. Now, if there's any doubt in your mind, this isn't just the New Thought community. It's not just this conference. It's not just a New Age wish. In September of 2005, think all the way back to 2005. Didn't that seem like a long time ago? Wow. September of 2005, the journal Scientific American released this issue. It is a special edition. It's a special edition of scientists, philosophers, engineers, social architects, religious leaders, political leaders, spiritual leaders, all coming together from many different walks of life. And they're all saying essentially the same thing. Something is up in our world. And the title tells the whole story. Look at the title. Crossroads for Planet Earth. And they talk about many of the crises that we're already very familiar with. The shortages of food and water that are growing all around the world. The economic crises and the impending collapse of the global economic system. In 2005, they knew it had to happen at some point. They knew. They didn't tell us maybe. But people who were watching the numbers knew that this crisis was coming. And the crisis isn't over yet. I think you all know that. This is a big weekend for the European Union. Germany and France are in meetings, and they're going to make announcements today, if they haven't already, about where to go, and it's going to affect markets all over the world tomorrow. So they knew that this was coming. The danger of global war and multiple war fronts happening simultaneously. Unsustainable population. Ty just told me, is it Monday? Our 7 billionth person will be born? Oh, a week from Monday. Our 7 billionth brother and or sister will be born onto this planet. Can you imagine that? Now, as a musician, I'll tell you what I like. You've all heard the songs about the seventh son of a seventh son. So there's got to be a song about the 7 billionth son of a 7 billionth son or something. I don't know. My mind's working on it. It's on the back burner. Okay. So the journal told us they were giving the world. This is the scientific community. That's why this is important. This is the scientific community saying to the world, heads up world, something has got to change because we are on a dangerous trajectory. We are living multiple crises. Now, there was a time in my life I didn't like the word crisis. I didn't want to hear that word. But I'm going to tell you why I really like the word now. If something is in crisis, it means it's not over yet. Crisis means we still have time to do something about it. Crisis simply means there's something happening that needs our attention. And multiple crises tell us that there are multiple things that need our attention in a big way. It was Harvard biologist E.O. Wilson that contributed to this article. And he made a statement. I love the imagery of this statement. Listen to what he said. Quote, he said, we are entering what he called a bottleneck in time. A bottleneck in time. I like that image. It's like a little narrow passage where a whole bunch of things have to pass through. We're entering this bottleneck in time, he said, when our resources, our physical resources, our emotional resources, our psychological resources, our resources of compassion, our resources of patience, and our ability to solve our problems will be pushed to their limits. Do you think maybe we're in that bottleneck now? Do you? I think we are. I think we reached. Now remember, this was 2005. People who were watching the trends knew that something was up in 2005, so it's not just us. Our ancestors, our ancient ancestors understood the cycles as well. Now, in other programs, I could talk to you about the Tibetan traditions that I've experienced personally, or the Andean traditions and the shamans in Bolivia and Peru. We're here talking about 2012, and the Maya calendar is the one calendar that uses numbers the way we think of numbers to tell us about these cycles. Now, I know that John Major Jenkins spoke about this to some degree, and there may be a little overlap, but I also know that there are things here that he did not address that may pull it together. So I'm going to go through this quickly to get to the false assumptions of science. But the ancient Maya, they are among the many indigenous traditions that calculated cycles of time, and they calculated what are called great world ages. You and I are living a rare, precious, pivotal moment, the last year of a great world age. Our world age, the end of this mysterious cycle, it began on August 11, 3114 BC. That's when this great world age ended. It's a 5,125-year-long cycle, precisely 5,125 years long. Or another way to think about this is precisely 1,872,000 days. Precisely. How did the Mayans know this? They based the beginning of our world age on a rare astronomical alignment, and they knew that from the time that alignment occurred, precisely 1,872,000 days later, it would happen again, because it always does. Because they understood the cycles, the rhythms of the earth. Now, how did they know? That's another workshop. Where did they get this information? But I'm going to allude to that a little bit later on. 1,872,000 days. That means for the last 1,872,000 days, we've been on the clock. We've been on a countdown. At any point in that cycle, we knew exactly how many days remained until the end of the cycle. Now, there have been, this, by the way, is not a Mayan calendar. Some people think this is the Mayan calendar. This is an Aztec calendar that came later, but it incorporates elements of the Mayan way of thinking, the Mayan calendar. Can you see these little square boxes up here and there and there? I'm going to highlight them. Can you see those from where you are? Each one of those is a world age that has already happened in the past. The Mayans tell us there have been 4 world ages in the past, and that we are living the end of the 5th, the glyph for the 5th world age is staring at you. It's the glyph in the middle looking out at you. So these are the 4 world ages in the past. This is the 5th. Each world age, each glyph has a picture in it that tells how that world age ended. And now we can confirm them scientifically. We can confirm them geologically. There was a world age that ended when a great fire swept the earth. There was a world age that ended when a great wind swept the earth clean. There's a world age that ended when the earth was covered with ice. There's a world age that ended when the ice melted and the earth was covered with what? Now what I think about what we just said, they're all of the elements: earth, air, fire, and water. Isn't that interesting? And this world age ends, that glyph is the glyph for movement. And the ancestors can't tell us what that means. If it's a physical movement of the earth, it could be a movement of thinking, it could be a movement of belief systems, it could be a movement of the way people work and cooperate together, which is what I personally believe we're witnessing right now. So, there have been 4 world ages in the past. We're living the last year's the 5th. Now, our world age began on August 11th, actually at noon, on August 11th, 3114 BC. Okay, this is your first test. Do the quick math. You're taking notes. You can do it. Okay, 3114 BC, August 11th. Okay, add 1,872,000 days. And what is the year, the month, and the day that the next world age begins? Okay, I know you're all psychic. I know you're all intuitive. Just take a wild guess, you know. Okay, it happens to be the winter solstice, December 21st, 2012. It's not the end of the world, it's the end of a world age. Now, the media has picked up on this, and they've latched on to the most frightening of possibilities, and it is scaring the hell out of a lot of people all over the world. I've seen it, especially young people. Can you imagine being a young person just graduating from high school next year, and the media it's on TV, it's got to be true, so TV's telling you the world ends when you graduate? Seriously. I had an email from a young girl, and she said it doesn't seem fair that the world would end just when my life is going to begin. And that is reflecting the thinking of a lot of young people. There's no scientific evidence that the bad things that are being shown in the media are going to happen the way they're being portrayed in the media. Here's the reason why. I want you to see this. 2012 is not so much about a date. 2012, December 21st, is the last day of the cycle on the Mayan calendar. And if it's the last day of one cycle, by definition, it's what? It's the beginning of the sixth world age. We could all be celebrating the beginning of the sixth world age, but that's not as cool as the end of the last one. So people like to talk about endings. But here's what the Mayan elders themselves tell us. That there is a window of time. I'll say hi to this side of the room. Hi to this side of the room. The Mayans themselves, they tell us that that's the date on the calendar, but it's not about a date. It's about a window of time. It's about a zone of time, a zone of change, and that zone is a 30-year window between the year 1980 and 2016. They said that's when you can expect the change. Now, why am I sharing this with you now? Here's the reason. Because to me, it feels way different to know that we are already, this is now 2011, almost the end of 2011. If the zone of change that the Mayans are talking about ends in 2016, we're over halfway through that window. It means we're already living many of the most frightening prophecies and predictions that we see in those very authoritative television specials. Think about this. What happened? What happened? Very authoritative? I thought maybe my pants were unzipped or something. I mean, that's the only time people laugh at inappropriate time. It's okay, I got black underwear on. You would never know it. Never in a million years. Okay. Pardon me? Okay, we'll scratch that. Now the world knows. Here's a 30-year window of time. We are over halfway through and well into the changes. Think about this. We are already living many of the most frightening of the prophecies and predictions that we have been told to expect and anticipate and fear on one date in our future. They're already happening. We're already seeing fires raging out of control on multiple continents in the summer months. We're already seeing the weather patterns change and the crops don't grow in their season and the food shortages. We're already seeing the ice melt. The sea levels are rising. We're already seeing multiple wars on multiple continents. We're seeing 25 new diseases that have no known medical cures. These are the most frightening of the predictions and prophecies that our ancestors told us could happen, and at the same time, we're seeing a lot of really good things happening, aren't we? A lot of good, beautiful things happening in the world. Wouldn't you agree? Yeah. So to me, I personally feel much different knowing that we're already dealing, and I think we're doing a pretty good job. We could do better. But I think we're doing a good job because for most people, we're in uncharted territory. For most people, this is a learning curve. We've never had to do something like this because of the way we've been led to think about our world. We've been led to think that civilization happened one time, that it's linear, from primitive to advanced, and that here we are trying to deal with these changes. One of the new discoveries you're going to see in a few moments is that that's not true. Civilization is cyclic. Our ancestors lived through these cycles. We can learn from them and apply what they knew in our lives. And that's part of what I want to talk to you about today. So we're living a window of opportunity, a zone of change. It's not about a bad thing that's going to happen. It's about the way we respond to those changes. Now, I was trained as a geologist. My first degree is in the earth sciences. And I worked for Phillips Petroleum in the 1970s energy crisis. So when people ask me, Gregg, what can we realistically expect? Not what are the prophecies and the predictions and the guesses. Realistically, my scientific brain wants to look at the cycles of the past to give us an idea, just to give us an idea. So are you interested? We don't have to do this. Are you interested in looking geologically just for a few minutes? Okay, so because this is a high-tech program, I could flip right by this and you'd never know it. But if you're interested, I want to share it with you. What we know is that world age changes always bring global changes, always bring changes in the weather patterns, in the way we can grow our food, and who gets rain and who gets snow, and who doesn't get rain and who doesn't get snow. That affects the way that we share our resources back and forth. That always happens. So when the world changes, we change. We are changed in the presence of a changing world. And now historians are linking the rise and fall of civilizations and cycles of war and peace to the great world age cycles that you were never taught about when you were in school. Probably I wasn't taught when I was in school, unless you went to a really progressive school. I wish when I was in kindergarten somebody had said, Gregg, in your lifetime, you will see the end of a 5,125-year-long cycle that began the year 3114 BC. You're living the last days of the fifth world age. I wish they'd told me that. I might have made some different choices along the way. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe not. The 60s were still great, though, okay? No matter how you look at it. There's a whole workshop there we could do. All right. The key in the cycles of the past is if you know where to look in the cycles of the past, you know what to expect when they repeat. It makes perfect sense. There is an entire library locked up in the ice of the earth. I know some of you know this and some of you have never heard of this. Every year there's a new layer of ice on the north and the south poles that's deposited. When the ice is laid down, it captures little particles of dust, pollen grains, little air bubbles from the atmosphere. And scientists now can analyze those. And now the pollen grains tell us about where the wind patterns were. The dust tells us about volcanoes in the air, or volcanoes throwing dust into the air. We know how much oxygen and how much carbon dioxide existed in the past. So when that layer freezes, that information is locked in place. That makes sense? Perfect sense? Okay. In 1999, the scientists of the Earth, in a great act of cooperation, without the governments telling them, this was independent scientists, pulled together from many different countries. They went to the thickest part of the Antarctic ice, an area called Vostok Lake in Antarctica. And they said, I'm just paraphrasing because I wasn't there. So they said something like, global warming is melting our library. Let's drill to the bottom of the thickest ice and save what we can. In 1999, they did that, but even the scientists were amazed at how much data they pulled up from that ice core. When they drilled to the bottom, they pulled up over 420,000 layers of ice. Each layer is 1 year of the history of the Earth. All of a sudden, scientists had 420,000 years of our past to compare to right now to see if Earth is broken, to see if we're living a time that's anomalous. And I want to share with you a little bit about what we found here. Some of you have never seen this. This is what the ice library looks like. These are libraries of ice cores. Here is an actual ice core right here, and you can see the layers. You see all the layers, the striations in there? Each one of those is a year of Earth's history. Okay, I'm going to go through this really quickly because we've got so much to cover today, but I just want to give you, I want to give you the essence. The essence, got to go with it. The essence of what was found. Now, this is one of the ice cores. I always thought if this whole author thing doesn't work out for me, I could go back as a geologist and work with the ice cores because every time I see them, they're always smiling, see? So this must be a lot of fun to do this job. But from these ice cores, we can tell about ancient temperature, ancient sea levels, the strength of the sun, which is going to be very important in just a minute, and the strength of Earth's magnetic field. So, climate change. I'm just going to ask you a question here. How many in here are you in agreement that the climate is changing? Okay, and it is, okay? How many think that the climate is warming? Okay, how many think the climate's cooling? Well, the answer is yes. And this is why I think it's really important to look at the data in perspective. Now, a few years ago, there was a very popular film that brought the idea of climate change right into our living rooms, and I think that is the great service that this film did. It was a film on global warming. It's called An Inconvenient Truth. And I saw that, and I thought, at last, we're getting it into our living room. The idea is good, but let me share with you the data and some of the mistakes that were made with the data. This is a chart right here that was shown in a lot of that film. 1880 to the year 2000. Okay? From 1880 to the year 2000, this is the annual mean of temperatures. If you look at that, it looks like there's a big problem, doesn't it? The temperatures are going up. Actually, they're going up and they're going down. Here it's warming during that part, and here it's cooling during that part. What the chart doesn't show is right before 1880, the world was coming out of a cooling cycle. It was called, well, in Europe, it was part of what was called the Great Potato Famine. A lot of people died because the weather changed. They couldn't grow the food the way they used to. The reason the data starts in 1880 is because that was the first year that consistent records were kept by the National Weather Service in the United States, for North America and other parts of the world. So it begins in 1880. Both things are happening here. Now, the next chart that I show you, those 420,000 years of the history of the Earth. Here is the present time. Here's 420,000 years. It stops right there. The chart goes to 450, but the data stops at 420. And all I want you to see from this, here is one of the ice cores in blue. Here's another one of the ice cores in green. You can see they agree with one another. And can you see cycles happening here? Do you see obvious cycles? Yes or no? Group participation, yes or no? Okay. And what you're seeing on the bottom in the red, this is the thickness of the ice as it changes in relation to temperature. So here, when the temperature rises, right after the temperature rises, the ice thickness drops because it melts. Makes perfect sense. And as the temperatures drop, then the ice begins to get thicker again. So all I want you to see, number one, is that there's a rhythm, there's a cycle. It is roughly every 100,000 years, approximately. Every 100,000 years is when you see this. Okay, we are right here, and I would expect to see us going into a period of warming because of where we are in the cycle right here. I would be concerned if we weren't in a warming right now because it would mean something was different, and I would wonder what it is that changed. Okay, so you can see the cycles. That's all I want you to see here, right? Yes? Okay, now let's look at something else. Here are temperatures on the bottom. These are some of the gases, greenhouse gases, that we've been told to be concerned about. And here you see carbon dioxide. Here you see some methane. So I'm just going to ask you this question. Does it look like there's a correlation between the rise of temperatures and gases? Do you see? Right there and there and there. There's a correlation, and I agree there's a correlation. Now, before I go any further with this, I have to say something, be really clear. We definitely need to clean up our act here on planet Earth. We definitely need to find clean, green, sustainable ways of providing the fuel and the power for the grid and the way we live our lives on this planet. We need to do that. Now, I'm going to show you something in the data that may upset some people, but I want to share with you why it's important, and it's going to lead right into the rest of the program. Because we have been told that we created the warming, that we caused it. That is a direct quote. We caused global warming. We must fix global warming. First of all, from this, you can see we didn't cause global warming because it's happened in the past. Would you agree with that? All right. And because there has been carbon dioxide ebb and flow in the past, we didn't create the carbon dioxide, not all of it. Would you agree with that? Have we contributed to it? Yes, we have contributed. We didn't create it. But I'm going to show you something else, and this isn't getting much attention in mainstream media. It's in all these charts are in the new book. If you're taking notes, just stop taking notes and go get the book, okay? No, the charts are all in the book, just so you know. All right. The rise and fall of the gases and the temperatures are definitely linked. Now, here's present day. Here's 100, 200, 300, 400,000 years ago. I want to share something with you here, and this changes the whole conversation. And it's a delicate situation. It's a delicate conversation that can be misused. So I'm going to be very clear about why I'm sharing this, but let's take a look at this first. So if you're going to take a break, don't take it now because I want you to hear the whole thing, okay? If you look at this closely, I'm going to call your attention to this area right in here. The red is the temperature. The blue is the carbon dioxide gas. Okay, if you're coming from, and here's present day. So if you're coming toward present day, okay, what you're seeing here, what rises first, the temperature or the carbon dioxide? Exactly, and this is the danger of stepping back and just looking at the big picture without looking at the details. What you're seeing here is that the temperature rises first, and then the greenhouse gas rises. The temperature rises first, and then the greenhouse gas rises. And it's most pronounced here, but it is happening here and it's happening here as well. Okay, you can see that. The temperature rises before the greenhouse gases. Now, very prestigious journals have published this, and it hasn't made it into the mainstream thinking. This is the journal Nature, very prestigious journal Nature, volume 329, 4414, 4418. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but what it says, changes in CO2 content in the atmosphere never precede changes in the air temperature. Carbon dioxide never rises first to cause that when we're going from glacial to interglacial. That's where we're coming out. The glacial system ended about 12,000 years ago, okay? When we're going from interglacial to glacial, and this is where it's believed we are today. We're in an interglacial period. We're moving toward a cooling. The change in the carbon dioxide lags the change in the air temperature. What does that mean? It means the air temperature rises first, and then the gases rise later. And there's a lag time usually of about 400 to 800 years. 400 to 800 years is the lag time between temperature and the gases. Now, this is completely opposite of what many of us have been led to believe. Why am I sharing this with you? Here's the reason why. It all goes to the theme of what we're going to talk about today, cooperation. Cooperation. Remember last year, Copenhagen 2010? You remember that, the climate summit? Did you know that it happened? Okay, last year, 2010, there was a climate summit that was held in Copenhagen. There was a lot of hope that the leaders of the world, they were physically there, that they would get together and really make an inroad into the possibilities of climate change. Now, I'm going to share with you what could have happened and then what did happen. Here's what could have happened. It's a beautiful scenario. What could have happened is the leaders of the world could have come together and said, look, we don't know why the climate is changing, but it is. And the people of our nations are losing their lives. We're losing cities on the coastlines. As superstorms wipe them away, people are losing their ability to create food and living the way they have in the past. Let's work together to help our people adapt to the climate change, and let's show the world that we are greater than the differences that have divided us in the past. What a powerful opportunity for cooperation, wouldn't you agree? That's what could have happened. What did happen was based on false assumptions of this kind of data. This chart didn't come up. Based on false assumptions of other kinds of data that lead the people to believe that climate change is human-induced. Some nations began to point fingers at other nations, saying humans caused it, and you caused more than you, and you caused more than you, and because you caused more than you need to pay a lot of money to make things better. And it caused such hard feelings that it was difficult to have that cooperation. Can you see where the hard feelings would make it difficult to have that kind of cooperation? This is one of the dangers of false assumptions of science. And that's why we're going to go into these deep truths and the false assumptions. It's dangerous thinking skews our willingness to work together, and we need to work together now more than ever. Did I say that okay? Does that make sense? All right. I just want to share with you some of the scientists that don't get a lot of visibility. Some scientists don't get to share their viewpoint. This is from Sally Bolinas, astronomer, Harvard-Smithsonian Center. She said, quote, "The recent warming trend in the surface temperature record cannot be caused by the increase of human-made greenhouse gases in the air." She just flat out says it's not. Here's University of Rochester, David Douglas, professor, Department of Physics. He says the warming doesn't show the characteristics that we would expect with global warming. Okay, so this is what he is saying. So the bottom line is, right now, the data doesn't support that humans cause global warming. Humans probably contributed to global warming. We definitely need to clean up our act, but we also need to cooperate as we come to terms with the global warming. We've been led to believe that we can stop it. How do you stop a natural cycle? You tell me. Do you think you can stop it? Okay. What causes it? It's Earth's position in space, the tilt, the angle, the wobble, the orbit. The only way to stop global warming is if you stop the tilt, the angle, the wobble, and the orbit. And that's one thing I know you don't want the governments messing with. Absolutely. Please leave the tilt, angle, and wobble of Earth alone. I believe, and this is my personal feeling, this is a natural rhythmic cycle that is rare, and we haven't seen it in our lifetimes. We are better served working together to adapt than pointing fingers and blame trying to stop it. So that is why I wanted to share this with you. Now, thank you. This chart, this is the last chart like this I'm going to share with you. Remember I said that our relationship to the sun changes. The red line is the intensity of the sun's energy reaching the earth. Here's present day. Here's 5,000 years ago, the last world age. Here's 10,000 years ago. And what I want you to see is this. I'm going to do this really quickly. There's 5,000 years ago. I'm sorry, there's today, there's 5,000 years ago. If you draw a line from the intensity of the sun then to now, what you see, I'm going to clean this up. Let's clean this up a little bit. There it is right there. The intensity of the sun reaching the earth today is almost precisely where it was 5,000 years ago, the last world age. And if you go another 5,000 years, 10,000 years ago, it's very close to where it was then as well. I wrote a book called Fractal Time. I know some of you have that book. And this summary is in fractal time. These are some of the major parameters, the magnetism, global warming, the ice, and the energy from the sun over the last two world ages averaged together. Historically, the magnetic field of the Earth has been between 5.5 and 10.5. On this scale, right now we're at 7.5, okay? That means we're where we should be. That's why I'm showing this to you. I don't want to get real technical. I just want you to see that Earth isn't broken. Historically, the Earth does warm 1 to 2 degrees Celsius as we go through this. We're globally around 1.5 degrees Celsius. Some places it has warmed more, and that may be because we contributed to the global warming. That could be. We didn't cause it, but we have contributed. The polar ice melts as we go through these cycles. It's melting now. The sun's energy, there's a sharp increase, and that's exactly what's happening now. So what does this mean? The bottom line for me, the bottom line is that we appear to be on track for the physical changes, the physical conditions that come at the end of a world age. This is what our ancestors tried to tell us. So I am less concerned about the physical conditions and more concerned with how we treat one another as we go through the changes. I'm more concerned with how we deal with the personal and the social and the cultural changes. Now, I'll just share with you, I'm going to deviate from facts. This is a Gregg-ism. This is my personal feeling. Here's what I think we're seeing right now. I think what we're going to see is that the changes, if you look at the chart, here's the chart. World age changes are really intense, and we're living some very intense changes right now. But they're also brief. The warming doesn't last forever and ever and ever. As a matter of fact, many scientists believe the warming topped out, and we're now moving into what comes next, and it's what comes after the warming that's more of a problem than the warming. What comes after the warming? Global cooling. Why is that a problem? Here's the reason why. It affects the northern hemisphere more than the southern hemisphere. The northern hemisphere is where most of the land is. It's where most of the people live. It's where our food is grown. That's what we ought to be getting ready for. In my opinion, it's what comes after the warming cycle. But I sense that this is what's happening. I think that the transition period shown in these geologic changes, I think this and the social changes are becoming so intense that they will force us to work together in ways that we never have before, because we need to get through the changes. I think we're seeing that begin. But I also believe that what will happen is that even when the changes are no longer present, we're going to find that we're better people and we have a better world because we work together, and we'll continue working together when we're not going through all these crises. And by doing that, I think we will meet the most beautiful prophecies of our ancestors that say we have a new world that looks very different from the world of the past. The changes will force us to work together, and then when the changes are no longer there, we'll continue to work together. You think that's possible? I think that's exactly where we're going. I also think we're having a rough road to get to that point. I'm not saying it's all a bed of roses, and this is what I want to talk about today. This clock was created in 1948, I believe is the date, 1948. It was a clock created by the atomic scientists, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. In 1948 was 3 years after the detonation of the first nuclear bomb. The feeling was that the world was very close to making some bad decisions. And every year, how many have seen this clock before? Some have, some haven't. Every year, the scientists, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, they update the clock. They move the hands on the clock to tell us how close we are to the worst decision, which is midnight. Okay, midnight is a bad day for Earth. And every year they update this to tell us where we are. Well, this is now 2011. The nuclear threat is less of a threat, so now they take into consideration other factors that are going on, like climate change and many of the crises that we're looking at. They incorporate those. In March of this year, May of 2011, this is where they put the hands on the clock. It's right around 6 minutes before midnight. Okay, 6 minutes before midnight. It's not the end, but I'd like to see us more like, half past midnight or something like that. What they're saying is this. It's not a doomsday prophecy. It's a heads up. It's a heads up saying, look, we're getting dangerously close to one of two things, to either making some really bad decisions or making some really good choices. And this is the scientists of the world telling us this. Bad decisions or good choices. You and I have the opportunity, this rare, absolutely rare, precious, pivotal moment to tip the scales in our favor in a way that has, to the best of my knowledge, has never happened here on planet Earth. And you're all part of it, and you're all vitally important. Even the person making that call. Whoever's on the other end of that cell phone is vitally important, and they want to be here right now. All right. So it is true. We are living this time, this zone of extremes. A zone of extremes. The experts are telling us we must act. They're saying we must act. My question and what led to the book is how? How are we supposed to act? How can we possibly, I'm just going to ask you this, how can we possibly make the greatest choices of our survival until we understand the deepest truths of our existence? How can we? And here's the reason that's important. Here's the reason why. The way that you and I, we're in this together, the way that we answer a single question is the key. I'm going to ask you this question in just a moment. The way that we answer a single question, it's a key for every decision that you're ever going to make in your life or that you ever have made. It's the basis for every choice that you have ever made or will make now. The way you answer one question, it's the heart of every challenge that has ever crossed your path. The way you answer one question. And the question is deceptively simple. If you're asking yourself the question, it's this: who am I? Because there's a lot of us together, it's who are we? And you may say, well, what's the big deal about that question? The way that we think of ourselves in the world, our relationship to ourselves, our relationship to one another, our relationship to the earth and beyond, is the basis for the choices we make, the policies we enact, the laws that we pass, and the way that we solve our problems. It's all based in the way we think of ourselves. Suddenly, this becomes a question. I don't know what could be more important than how we think of ourselves. Who are we? Well, here's why this is important. I have spent the bulk of my adult life looking for the answer to that question from many different perspectives. And I love to look at this slide. Ty heard me talk about this last week, because people have pointed out to me that my search is documented by the length of my hair over the years. And then during the book signing, somebody told me it's also documented by the color of my hair over the years. So, you know, it is what it is. My journey has taken me, and some of you have shared the journey with me, and you're here anyway. And thank you both for being here, and they survived and came back, and here we are. My journey has taken me into some of the most amazing places in the world. 2 more people who have taken the journey with me, and you're still alive. I think the hardest part of this program is that every one of the slides I'm about to share with you has a story. And I'm not going to be able to share the story because of the interest of time. But my journey has taken me into some of the most amazing monasteries. What is called the roof of the world, the highest elevations on the Tibetan plateau. And very humble mud brick monasteries in the deserts, in the mountains of Egypt. I've had the opportunity to be in many of the beautiful, magnificent temples throughout Southeast Asia, and be with young monks who open the doors to hidden libraries to share with us what it is they know that we forgot. And I've had the opportunity to look at these books, in some cases translate them myself, so I know what I'm actually reading. And they come from even older sources of knowledge. And what's in these books is translated into many other traditions that I've had the opportunity to see firsthand. And as different as they are from one another, there are common themes that flow through all of these traditions. And I've had the opportunity to share the time with men and women who live those traditions in their lives. These are the sadhus in outside of Nepal, the tantric masters in northern India. I've had the opportunity to meet with the monks and the nuns and the abbots and the lamas in some of the most sacred and cherished traditions, the holy women that are still alive today, that share and preserve this knowledge and this wisdom with us. I've had the opportunity to meet and spend time and share time with the shaman in the high Andes of Bolivia and Peru, and with many of the indigenous musicians throughout the world who share the power of their sound to open our hearts. Power of their sound to open our hearts. I've had the opportunity to meet beautiful pilgrims like this man that full body prostrations across the Tibetan plateau for 8 months to be at the temple where I met him. What he's wearing on his hands are the pads to keep his hands from rubbing raw as he goes down into the next full body prostration. 8 months across the Tibetan plateau. And beautiful nomads. I mean, look at this woman's eyes. Look how clear she is. All of them, as different as they are from one another, these people live in a world whose traditions allow for the change that we are living right now. They've known it, they expected it, they anticipated it. Western world, the modern world, the world of science that began 300 years ago doesn't allow for these traditions. It hasn't allowed for the cycles of nature and the cyclic changes of the earth and what it means to us. So we have a lot to learn from our ancestors if we have the wisdom to acknowledge and embrace what they have preserved for us. For over 5,000 years, our ancestors did their very best to answer the question, who are we? It's only been the last 300 years that science tried to do the same thing. 300 years since about the time of Isaac Newton is when we say the scientific method first began. Whoops. There's a problem. You're going to see this slide a lot. There's a problem. For 300 years, science has tried to answer the questions, who are we? The problem is this: science doesn't believe the scientific answers. Science finds the answers and they say, oh, that can't be the answer because that changes everything. So we'll put that answer over here. The quantum stuff that tells us we're all connected, we'll put that over here. Science is stuck on the big questions of life. Now, I'm going to make a distinction between science and technology. The technology of our iPads and iBooks and iPhones, awesome. The cloud, awesome technology. But the big, deep questions of life. For 300 years, the best minds of our planet with the most money and the most machines have been asking these questions, and they're looking within the parameters that they have been led to believe are true. They don't have the answers yet. Don't you think if we were on the right track after 300 years of the best minds and the most money and the biggest machines and the most expensive technology, we would have those answers by now? Don't you? If we were on the right track. Science still has not answered the question, what is life? They cannot come up with a definitive answer for life. Science still cannot tell us how life began. Science can't tell us how we began. We're going to talk about this in a minute. They're still looking for the unified field theory. If we were on the right track, don't you think we would have that theory by now? They've written consciousness out of the equation, and they're wondering why they can't get the unified field theory to work. Okay. I think science is a good method. It's only good if we honor the way science is designed. Science is meant to be updated when new discoveries are made. Those new discoveries must be incorporated into the existing belief systems. That's where the system is breaking down today. That's where we began today. New discoveries, they're not being reflected in mainstream media, classrooms, textbooks. The teachers are losing their jobs for even suggesting there are alternative theories to some of our most cherished beliefs. Okay, so I think we're on the wrong track. Now, there are many false assumptions that science has made. I'm going to share 5 of them with you, and then I'm going to ask for your permission to eliminate a couple of them real quickly. Okay, let's do this. If you're in school today, if you have young people in school, when I was in school, we were taught that evolution explains life and it explains human life. If you're in school today, or your kids are, we're taught that civilization began about 5,000 years ago at the beginning of this cycle, and that it happened once, that it's linear, primitive to sophisticated. We're being taught that consciousness is somehow separate from our physical world, that the space between everything is empty, between me and you, that there's nothing there, and that nature is based on what is called survival of the strongest. If you're taking notes, don't even waste your time. Just make a couple of scribbles and then call these false assumptions and put one of those through it. Because every one of these is scientifically false. Every one of these, and this isn't just new thought, peer-reviewed journals, peer-reviewed, that's accepted in the scientific circles. The mainstream refuses, or at least is reluctant, in some cases is absolutely refusing to carry these in the way the teachings are. Now, here's why this is important. The way that we think of ourselves obviously is important. Okay, the way we think of ourselves, how life began, where human life comes from, our relationship to our body. You know, are we separate from these bodies? Are we like over here and our bodies are here? Or what is our relationship to the world, the history of civilization, and how we solve our problems? This is a pyramid of thinking. The false assumptions of science have led us to believe that life is absolutely a random process. If we had the right time and the right conditions, that life would occur just the way it did somewhere else. The data doesn't support it, but this is what we've been led to believe. We've been led to believe that human life follows the same assumptions, that we are given the right amount of time, the right conditions, that we would happen just the way we are again. That we are separate and powerless from our bodies is what we've been led to believe, and this is much of the medical system. I've just been through this with the test with my mom this last week. Very interesting insights into the way some very brilliant medical doctors are led to think. That we're separate and independent from our world, and that civilization is a linear experience. It began primitive, one time, boom, here we are, and then that's it. Okay, if all of these were true, they're not. They're false assumptions. If they were true, then I can see where it would make total sense for competition and conflict to be the way we solve our problems. That's what we do today, based on these false assumptions. But the new discoveries are telling us that these are false, and it now is telling us that conflict makes no sense, that competition is not what nature is based upon. So now I'd like to share with you those discoveries and then do something with them. Okay, are we doing all right? I'm going to go really fast. All right. I'm going to move fast because I want you to see all this. But it's based on those false assumptions that we see the breakdown of the systems that we're experiencing today. The crises of our world are showing us where our thinking was incorrect. I'm not going to say that we should judge our past. I'm not going to say we did it wrong. I'm going to say we are on a huge learning curve. And if we're really smart, what we'll say is that what we did in the past got us to where we are today. And we can let it go based on what we now know to be true and move forward, as Ty has helped all of us to envision, without judging the past. That's where we get really hung up, in the criticism of the past. But look at this. Here's the cover of Time magazine. They're seeing global warming, a rhythmic natural cycle, is a war, first of all. So that's the conflict way of thinking. And it's a war that you can win. How are you going to win a war of natural rhythms? The crises today, our false assumptions have caught up with us, okay? They've led to the global extremes that have become the human extremes. And the human extremes directly affect every one of us because they become our personal extremes. We are all affected. This is our family. This is our family. It's the only family we have. And it's not like some of us are going to get through this change without the others. We're all going through it. And we're all going to get to the other side. The question is, what are we like when we get there? That is being chosen in this moment. In this moment. So I'm going to ask your permission in the best use of time. If you're in this room, I know that you already know some of these are false. You've been with me, you've read the books, you've heard enough other people. If we'd simply say, the space between things is empty, you all know it's not, there is no empty space. Are you okay if we cross it out and don't talk about it? Cool. Okay, if we say consciousness separate from our physical world, the new discoveries are showing that consciousness is the basis of the physical world. It's what's left out of the unified field theory. So if we cross that out, are you okay with that? Oh man, we're moving fast. This is great. Okay, the next two are related. Let's look at these two together. Evolution explains life and nature based on survival of the strongest. Both of these are assumptions that were made from a book that was published in 1859 by Charles Darwin. Now, up until 1859, the big questions of life were answered in the realm of religion. The church was believed to hold the answers to many of these questions. Who are we? How do we get here? What's our purpose? So in 1859, Charles Darwin, a scientist, took the first scientific attempt, first stab at answering these through the language of science. His book was called The Origin of Species. And because it was scientific and the first of its kind, the ideas were embraced quickly, they were entrenched deeply, and they were accepted throughout the world and remain entrenched to this moment today in many places. Now, if you go to the bookstore, this is the title that you're going to see. Do you all know about the rest of the title? I'm going to share with you the rest of the title of Darwin's book. It gives insight into his thinking, and it's a whole different vibe of what he was sharing. So the title that we see, if you go to Amazon, for example, The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, here's the rest of the title. Or The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. And this is his perspective. Now, I want to say something about Darwin. He was a scientist, and I think he was probably a pretty good scientist. In my estimation, the mistake that Darwin made was that he went to one place in the world and he made direct observations of insects and animals there, and he attempted to take what he saw in one place and generalize it and apply it to all life everywhere, including humans. Does that make sense? He took what he saw for some forms of life and tried to make it fit all forms of life. And the facts simply don't support it. The data doesn't support it. So, one of the things that Darwin said, and I want to share his own language. I want you to see Darwin's own words. They're a little flowery in the language, but I want you to see his exact language. Now, this is a scientific book. Tell me if you think this sounds scientific. He's talking about the origin of life itself. Where did it come from? Here's Darwin's definitive scientific explanation. He said, therefore, I should infer from analogy that probably all the organic beings which have ever lived on this earth have descended from some one primordial form into which life was first breathed. Think about that. Infer from analogy that probably, if he talks about into which life was first breathed, where did the breathing come from? These aren't really addressed in his ideas. What he's saying is that there something happened. Life began with a single cell, and from that all life emerged, including you and me. Here's the problem with that. And I'm probably not doing justice to this topic. In the interest of time, I'm going to hit the highlights. As a geologist, I tend to look at the geologic perspective. This is a geologic map of time. The most recent is the present is at the top. This is the oldest at the bottom. You all have heard, if you're in this room, I know you've heard of something called the Big Bang. In physics, it's when the big release of energy and the universe is believed to have begun. There's something in biology called the Big Bang of biology, and it happened right here. About 545 million years ago, a time called the Cambrian. And what we find here is that it's in this time that 98% of all of the forms of life that we see on Earth today all occurred in that relatively narrow window of time. They didn't evolve slowly and gradually over long periods of time. They appeared. I don't know why. I don't know what the answer is, but I know that that is not Darwinian evolution as we've been led to think of it. Here's a little chart right here. Here's all the forms of life that were in the world about 550 million years ago. Boom. Here is what's called the Cambrian explosion. Right there. Something happened. I don't know what it is, but this is not evolution the way that Darwin thought of it, as slow, gradual changes or punctuated equilibrium, as other biologists have talked about. The data doesn't support that this happened in this way. For life in general, what about humans? What about us? Well, last fall, this is one of the charts that was used on some of those very authoritative documentaries, the human family tree. This is us up at the top right here. And can you see these thin lines that link us? Can you see those lines right? I'm going to highlight them in blue. Right there. Everything that you see in blue, if you look here on the legend, what it says, those are not factual lines. They are inferred or speculative connections. Inferred or speculative, but they're being taught as fact in school. And if any alternative ideas are introduced in the classroom, I don't know about here in Canada, in the States, teachers are losing their jobs for introducing the possibility that an alternative theory may be available. How many of you have heard of Neanderthal or Cro-Magnon? Okay, this should have made national news. The cover of Scientific American or USA Today, it didn't. Neanderthal, when I was in school, I was led to believe Neanderthal was my ancestor. Okay? 1987, I'm just going to do this quickly as a very quick example. 1987, an amazing discovery that could be a whole workshop unto itself was made. There was a Neanderthal infant girl who was found preserved in a cave in northern Europe. Preserved. She wasn't fossilized. She wasn't mummified. She was preserved. Her skin was intact. Her eyes were intact. Her hair was intact. What else was intact? Who said that? DNA. Okay? They are supposed to be our ancestors. All of a sudden, we had DNA from those who were supposed to be our ancestors to compare to us today. It took 3 years for them to publish the results. The results were published in the very prestigious journal Nature in the year 2000. And here is volume 404, March 30th, 2000, page 490. So it's on the audio. You have it. You don't have to write it down. Because this is the deluxe 2-hour Toronto Symposium of 2012, I'm going to cut through the whole study and go to the last sentence of the last paragraph of the bottom line and tell you the conclusion. Here's the conclusion. The bottom line is this, is that the DNA in that Neanderthal girl was not, in fact, part of us. The results suggest that modern human was not, in fact, descended from Neanderthal. Their DNA and our DNA is not similar enough to say that they are our ancestors. Since that time, they found 40 more bodies in various states of preservation. The DNA has borne this out, and it's also told them that the Neanderthal walked the earth with us. We shared the earth with them, which means we could not have descended from them. So now we know who we are not. Okay? We're not descendants of Neanderthal. Okay, when I was in school, there was a form of life called Cro-Magnon. That term is no longer used for a very good reason. Right now, the term has been changed to anatomically modern human. Anatomically modern human for a very good reason, because that's what it is. Cro-Magnon, anatomically modern human, showed up on this earth 200,000 years ago, and for all intents and purposes, it has not changed to this day. If you take an anatomically modern human, a Cro-Magnon skeleton right there, and you look at my skeleton here, except for their leg bones being a little thicker because presumably they walked more than we do today, you cannot tell them apart. Proportions are the same. Cranial capacity is the same. We haven't changed in 200,000 years. We showed up 200,000 years ago. We haven't changed. That's not Darwinian. Now, I don't know what happened scientifically. I have my own personal ideas, my own personal beliefs. But scientifically, what we're being taught is not supported by the facts on the one hand, and on the other hand, the new discoveries are not being allowed to be shared in the classrooms, the textbooks, and the media. Now, we have a whole new generation of young people that want the answers just like we did. They're going to spend their lives trying to find out who we are, but they're being limited by the false assumptions that are being required in the classroom today. I believe there's a problem with that. I think there's a problem with that. So that's where I am with this. So because this is the 2-hour absolute bottom line update, you want the update on the missing link between us and them. I know you all want it, right? Okay, here is the update on the missing link between us and them. The update is it's still missing. And here is why I think it probably will be. This is another version of a family tree. Here is human right up here, Homo sapiens. And now you see we're all by ourselves there. My sense is about a year or two from now, I think we're going to be looking at this, and we're not going to be at the top of a tree. We're going to have our own bush. I think it's going to be very short because there's nobody but beneath us, because it is suggested we are our own species. We don't know where we came from. In the new book, I talk about the DNA. I'm just going to tell you, the DNA is unlocking the whole story. What scientists are saying right now is the DNA that allows us to be who we are, that makes us human. Specifically chromosome number 2. If you all want some light bedtime reading, go look at chromosome number 2. That the genes that make the DNA, that give us the traits and the characteristics of who we are, they could not have formed the way they did through natural processes. And then the scientists stopped there. Because that's all you can say scientifically. They cannot tell us why. I can't tell you why. I can tell you that if we want to get to the bottom of who we are, we need to go right here. We appeared on earth 200,000 years ago. If we want the truth, the deep truth of our existence, we need to answer that question. We can share what has been found in the past, but allow the new discoveries to be incorporated. Allow those new discoveries to be shared. So, Darwin said this. He said if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ, now he didn't even know about DNA. in his time. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous, successive, slight modifications, he says, my theory would absolutely break down. Darwin allowed for his theory to break down. It has broken down. Mainstream will not allow it to be modified. It will not allow it to change. And DNA is changing all that. So, deep truth, beyond any reasonable doubt, evolution does not explain human origins. Now, as a scientist, I have to tell you, be very honest, evolution is a fact. We see it in the fossil record for other forms of life. It's absolutely happened. To extrapolate what we see for other forms to human doesn't make sense in light of the evidence. So I just wanted to say, and I go into more detail in the book, but this is where I wanted to be with this today. The next part of Darwin's assumptions, right here. And I love it when he begins by casting doubt on what he's about to say. I like that. So what he does is he's looking in nature at the way animals and insects treat one another, and he's saying that those are small expressions in one place of a general rule that applies to all life, including us. Okay, so here's his exact words. He says, it may not be a logical deduction, but to my imagination, it is far more satisfactory to look at instincts such as young birds ejecting foster brothers. He looked at birds in a nest, and then when another bird would come that was different from the ones that were there, they would kick that bird out and leave it to die. Okay, so it makes more sense to look at birds ejecting foster brothers from the nest, ants making slaves of other ants. When other ants made slaves of species that were different from them or different from themselves in some way, he said these are small consequences of one general law leading to the advancement of all beings. The law is this: multiply, vary, let the strongest live and the weakest die. Let the strongest live and the weakest die. This is a dangerous way of thinking, and it plays a powerful role in your life right this minute. I'll just tell you right now, the economic system that is breaking down on a global basis has its foundations, let the strongest live and the weakest die. The ideas of corporations as they stand today, corporations can work well, but if the corporation is only about the bottom line, only about the money, and it's not about people, let the strongest live and the weakest die. These are the ways of thinking that are collapsing around us today, and they're based on false assumptions. Based on false assumptions of science. Since 1859, think about this, the world as we know it is largely in place since 1859 based on what we believe to be true. So since 1859, the widespread embracing, let the strongest live and the weakest die, has formed the basis for nations, for the way that we treat one another in our own countries, in other countries, form the basis for when we go to war, when we share resources, or when we let others fend for themselves because there's not enough to go around. Since 1859, some of the most twisted, horrid, and dramatic examples based upon Darwin's ideas permeated our memories of the 20th century. And some of these, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, you all know this, but many of these leaders who committed great atrocities against their own people justified what they did because they said it's scientific. It is justified, let the strongest live and the weakest die. And it's still happening today. You all know it's happening in our world right now, right this minute. This is why this is such a dangerous way of thinking. The problem is, and there's good news right around the corner here, the good news is that the facts don't support it. The facts don't support it. Our world is based on this idea of survival of the strongest, the way we treat one another, the way we grow our food, the way we deal with climate change, the way we share food, all of these things. Here's the good news. Over 400 peer-reviewed studies were done at the end of the 20th century asking one question. The question is this: what is the optimum amount of competition in any system, in the classroom, in the workplace, in the playing field? And when I say competition, I mean violent competition. I don't mean a friendly game of chess or soccer. What is the optimum amount? And all 400 studies came back with exactly the same answer. Take a guess. I'll just let you tell me. What is the optimum amount of competition? Absolutely. Look at this. Quote, the ideal amount of competition in any environment. That is a broad, sweeping scientific statement. In any environment, in the classroom, in the workplace, in the family, in the playing field, is none. Competition always, always, always is destructive. Nature is not based upon a model of competition. It may happen in nature. It's not the basis of nature. And competition always is destructive. In a very prestigious journal, New Scientist, look at this. This is a direct quote. What we see in the wild is not every animal for itself. Cooperation is an incredibly successful survival strategy. When cooperation breaks down, the results can become disastrous. And I think this is what we're seeing in our world today. A civilization, an global economic model based in a false assumption, survival of the strongest, competition in this way, it's breaking down because it is not a sustainable way of living. Maybe it works for 50 years, maybe it works for 100 years. It's not sustainable in the long term. And this is the opportunity we have today. If we try to go back and fix and get back to the way that things were, it means we must embrace the thinking of the past. I don't think we want to do that. I could be wrong. I don't think that's what we want. What we now know is that nature is based on what is called a model of mutual aid and cooperation, not the competition as we've been led to believe. Nature is not based on that model of competition. Does that make sense? Did I say that okay? Okay. Well, we're doing pretty good. We can cross evolution and nature based on survival of the strongest. And I want to take a look at this idea of civilization because it ties into these ideas. Civilization, when I was in school, when you're in school, your kids in school right now, we're being taught that civilization, advanced civilization, it's about 5,000 years old. And we're being shown a model that looks something like this. Here's a little timeline. 5,500 years ago, ancient Sumeria, the Mesopotamian valley. More recently than was Egypt, the Indus Valley in India, Greece, Rome, everything we think of as history. This is what we're taught is the meaningful history of the world. And before this, we're led to believe it's like this murky, weird thing where not much was happening. The problem is that the facts don't support it. Nothing could be further from the truth. And I'm just going to go through this. I'm going to fly through this to give you an idea. The book talks about many more examples. What's happening is this. Archaeologists are finding, and they're publishing in peer-reviewed journals, evidence of sites that don't fit that model. Now, in the past, if you found one or two, you would call it an anomaly. And so you'd put it aside and you say, we'll come back and study it later. What's happening is there's so many anomalies, the anomalies are telling a new story. And there's a reluctance to share that story in mainstream media, but it ties right into what we're doing here today. So I'm going to share the anomaly, then share why it ties in, and then we're going to do something cool, and then we're going to do something fun, and then we'll have a break and then a special guest. We'll just do it like that. Some of the sites I've had the opportunity to document myself. This is a site in northern Peru. I documented it only, had the opportunity to visit June of 2010. This site is now peer-reviewed. Science accepts. This is the oldest site in all of the Americas. It's older than any Aztec site, any Olmec site, any Mayan site, any Incan site. It may be the bridge between the most ancient and those modern. If you say, where did the Maya get the information that they knew? We're starting to look at sites like this as bridging archaeological sites. This is called Corral. It's in northern Peru. It is a very desolate place. It's still being excavated. 5 pyramids have been found so far. 2 huge circular plazas from the air. This is what they look like. Right there. These are huge sites with all kinds of implied astronomy, mathematics, agriculture, architecture. But I want to share with you what has not been found here. No evidence of large-scale warfare. No evidence of any weapons have been found. No walls, no moats, no signs that the city was protected or needed to be protected in any way. No mass graves, no mutilated skeletons as you would expect to see in a large civilization like this. It is now being dated. Now we're taught that civilization, 5,000 years old is when it began. Primitively, that's when this one ended. This one ended 5,000. It's at least 7,000 years before present. At least 7,000 years, possibly older. So this is one example, but I'm going to go to the oldest example. I'm going to cut right to the chase here. It's this site, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. Anyone been here? Göbekli Tepe. We should take a field trip right this minute. Okay, we will on this screen. Göbekli Tepe, if you haven't heard of it, you will. And I'm sharing these images with permission of the Smithsonian Institution that documented this, and also they're in the book for those that want to see in more detail. This site most of it is still underground. 15 to 20 circular ceremonial sites are still buried, and they see them through Earth imaging radar. Only 4 of these have been excavated, and these are not primitive sites. Look at what you're looking at here. These are huge stones, T-shaped stones that form the circles. What makes it interesting is the site was intentionally buried 8,000 years ago, but it's older than 8,000 years. 8,000 years ago, it was buried, and that means everything was preserved really well. So now we can see the images that were left on the stones, like these. All right. The date is now, through accepted scientific methods, the date is now being established, or I just cut to the bottom line, 11,370 to 11,560 years ago. That's over twice as old as what we have been led to believe is the beginning of civilization. And this is an advanced site. This is an advanced site. There are other sites, in the interest of time, we're not even going to talk about today, but let's look at this. Here's the history that we're taught today. Now, here is Kural. Whoops. There is Kural right there. Çatalhöyük, we didn't even talk about. It's 7,000 to 9,000. The Sphinx, you've all heard about. The Gulf of Kambat in India. 5-mile long, 2-mile wide city under 120 feet of water off the coast of India. Either the city was built underwater originally, or it was built close to the water and was submerged when the sea levels rose. We don't know which. Okay, the area that you see in the blue, that is the Ice Age. The last Ice Age ended about 12,000 years ago. For 4,000 years after the ice ended, there was a bad storm. It was a really bad storm. Okay, so here's the bad storm. And this is when the sea levels rose. This is when the ice melted. This is when the rains came and they didn't stop for a long period of time. And this happens to be in the area where we're finding some of these advanced civilizations. Now, we began today by talking about 5,000-year-long cycles, great world ages. I'm going to overlay great world age markers onto this map, and you'll see something interesting. Here they are right here. Those dark lines are great world ages. Here's the great world age that is ending in 2012. Here is the beginning of our world age. And when we're in school, the history of the world, the history that we're taught is the history of the whole world forever. It's not the history of the whole world forever. It's the history of what? The most recent cycle of our world age. The world age before that is not acknowledged here in the West. But look at that. This is when these traditions began. So where did the Mayans and others get some of the mathematics and things they knew? It's very possible they were a carryover from what was known here, and the evidence suggests that we're going to find more over here, but I cannot say it scientifically, so I didn't put them there. They're not scientifically accepted, although the sites exist. So they aren't scientifically dated to that time yet. So this changes everything that we're seeing. There was a cycle, at least one cycle before ours. Civilization began about 5,000 years ago. That's a false assumption. That's the most recent cycle of civilization began 5,000 years ago. And there was a cycle before that, and probably one before that. Now, what I'd like to do is take what we've just done very fast, very high level. I mean, we just flew right through this. Does this time seem like it's going fast to you? Yeah, me too. Okay. But we're going somewhere. Okay, now let's look. Here's the big questions of life. Here on the left are the ways that we've been led to believe we relate to life. That life is random, that human life is random, that we're separate and powerless from our bodies, that we're separate, independent from the world. The history of civilization is a one-way linear. And it actually makes sense to compete and conflict to solve our problems if these were true. The new deep truths, however, are showing that life is not random. Very, very precise conditions have to be present, and there is something in the DNA that cannot be accounted for in nature. The same is true of human life, and we talk about, the geneticists talk about this, and I share it in the book, that we are connected to our bodies. Our perceptions directly influence the way that our bodies heal and express themselves or don't. We're not separate from our bodies, that we are connected and interdependent with the earth itself, that civilization is cyclic, at least 2 cycles, probably more. And with all of this in mind, it makes tremendous sense, and nature is based upon what is called a model of cooperation and mutual aid. That's why I wanted to cover all of those things. The same science that tells us we're in a time of crisis is giving us the reasons to change the way we have been led to think. And the way we've been led to think about ourselves and our relationship to the earth means everything in terms of how we solve our crises and what we do in this room today. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. Okay. All right. So crises. What we know is that crises are the opportunity to address a situation. The data, same data that tells us that we're in crises, now tells us that we have the potential, I'm going to be really clear about this, not to impose our will upon the world, not to impose our will, not to impose our way of thinking or our beliefs. Rather, we have the opportunity to participate. Together, we can tip the scales of life in peace, in balance, in our favor. And our most cherished and ancient and sacred traditions tell us how, and our own science now is beginning to bear it out. So here's where we're going to shift gears a little bit. All those traditions I've studied, as different as they are from one another, in their own way, they all talk about a journey that every one of us is going to take in our lifetime. It's called life's longest journey. Do you know what life's longest journey is? It's not a very long journey. The average length of this journey is only about 18 inches. It may take us our whole lives to get there. It's the 18-inch journey that begins in the center of our thinking mind and leads us right down to where? Exactly, right down to the intelligence that resides in every one of your hearts. We're born with this amazing heart intelligence. In the past, it's been discounted in Western traditions, not in the other traditions. It's been discounted. But now our own science is beginning to tell us why this is so important. Our own science is beginning to tell us why. All of these ancient traditions, they've all told us that this key is right in the center of our chest. Our own science now is telling us something that we're only beginning to understand. If you're in this room, I know that you know the world is made of electrical fields and magnetic fields, right? You're all good with that. Electrical and magnetic fields. You know that if you want to heal your body or trigger the healing in your body or create peace in your world or bring about change in your life, somehow we must communicate with the stuff that the world is made of. It makes perfect sense. We must communicate with those electrical and magnetic fields. When I was in school and you were in school, we were taught the brain is the organ you use to do that. That the brain is where the action is. It's true that the brain, your brain, my brain, we have a relatively weak electrical field and magnetic field. But there's another organ whose electrical and magnetic fields are much stronger. We now know for a fact that the human heart creates an electrical field that can be up to 100 times stronger than the brain's electrical field. But listen to this, that the human heart has a magnetic field that is about 5,000 times stronger than the brain's magnetic field. Men, this may be some insight into why sometimes it's hard to think our way through the problems. Because our hearts are designed to feel our way through the problems, and we're not conditioned to do that as men in the Western world. Doesn't this make perfect sense? If you choose to communicate with the stuff that your world is made of, doesn't it make perfect sense that you would use the one organ in your body that was designed and has the strongest electrical and magnetic field to do that? The organ, the first organ to form in the body, in your body, in the womb of your mother, it's your heart. It forms before your brain. Okay, so you know that your heart is powerful. And we're going to find out just how powerful here in a few minutes. You know that your heart has a magnetic field. You know that the earth has a magnetic field. And what our own science, and you've probably heard this, what our own science tells us is that we are influenced by the magnetic fields of the earth. Remember those charts of the solar cycles I showed early in the program? Do you remember those? Those are the solar cycles influencing the magnetic field of the earth and us in turn. So the magnetic field is powerful. Now, we know that the field influences us. We don't have to spend any time on that. But we also know that we're not victims of that field. It's a two-way conversation. Now, if you have never seen this before, you're going to be amazed at what you're seeing here. And if you have, it's worth seeing one more time. Right now, there are 2 satellites above the northern hemisphere of North America. Every 30 minutes, they send a signal back to the Earth. And they tell the scientists of the Earth how strong the magnetic fields are. Every 30 minutes. So each of these boxes is one day. So there's a day, there's a day, there's a day. And the red is one of the satellites. The blue is the other. You can see every day there's an ebb and a flow, ebb and a flow, ebb and a flow. Okay? I'm going to call your attention right here. See that arrow right there? Can you see it? Yes, no? Okay. That arrow is what tells the story. That arrow is 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. On 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, on this day, there was a big spike in the magnetic fields of the Earth. And the scientists of the Earth, I wasn't there, I'm just imagining, I'm paraphrasing, they probably said, what on earth is causing a spike in the magnetic fields of the Earth? They overlaid this onto a calendar of time. And what they found may not be a surprise to you. That was 9 a.m. on September 11th, 2001. 9 a.m., 15 minutes after the first plane hit the first tower in the World Trade Center, scientists say it took about 15 minutes for the images of that to circulate around the world and for the people, millions of people, to respond to what they saw through the feeling in their heart. What we're seeing is the effect, among other things, of millions, if not billions, possibly billions, of human hearts in a moment in time responding with genuine heart-based emotion. Now, some of it was shock, some was surprise, some was anger, some was hurt, but they were heart-based emotions. And now the scientists, remember, scientists are conditioned to believe that we're separate from our earth. We're separate from the world, and this is showing that we're not. I can imagine, I wasn't there, but they probably said, oh, wow. No, I can't tell you what they really said. They probably said, dang. They probably said, I can't even tell you what because we're on tape. But I know they were surprised. Because this gives new meaning to the concept of Gaia, of Earth being a living system and us being part of the Earth. This was the heads up. that we are connected to the fields of the earth through our hearts in a very powerful way. If there was a good thing that came from 9/11, it was the information to the scientific community that we are connected in ways that we're only beginning to understand. And you knew that. Remember the first few days after 9/11, the world was really connected. Remember that? I mean, it was a really, I was out of the country. I was in Australia when it happened. And I sensed it there, and I came back to a very different country on the first flights that were allowed back into the States. For a few days, we all sensed that, okay? Now, the question now is about whether or not we can create that kind of effect without having the tragedy. The scientific hypothesis, and this again is from the Institute of Heart Math. We're going to talk more about them, and we're going to learn some more about them in just a few minutes. The hypothesis is that precisely what you saw happening is possible, that strong collective emotion has a measurable impact on the very fields of the earth that connect and sustain all life on earth. The magnetic fields connect everything, every blade of grass, every hamster, every goldfish, every dog, every cat, every CEO of every corporation, every leader of every nation. There's no them and us when it comes to the magnetic fields of the earth. If you choose to cast your vote for unity and peace, your heart is your voting machine. If you understand the language of this field, you may nourish and feed the field in very precise ways. And that's what this afternoon is all about. Now, it was based on that. The Institute of Heart Math did something that has never been done before. The Institute of Heart Math began a project. They launched a project that is called the Global Coherence Initiative. Coherence is a state. It's a relationship between our heart and our brain that optimizes our relationship to this field. When you're in high coherence, you're having a good conversation with that field. And we'll have the experience of coherence right after the break. So we know that personal coherence is good. Global coherence is really good. And we create global coherence through our individual coherence. Based on that, the Institute of Heart Math has launched the first of its kind ever initiative to do just that as an independent organization. This isn't part of a government organization. It's not part of some big corporation. This is an independent, privately funded project. The Global Coherence Initiative. Now let me read to you the mission statement. This has never happened before. The mission statement, the goal is to unite millions of people from varied beliefs and cultures from across the borders and the boundaries that separate us in the past of nations and belief systems and religions and spiritual practices. To unite people from many different beliefs and cultures for the specific purpose of shifting global consciousness from instability and chaos to balance and cooperation. That is the stated purpose and only purpose of this project. This has never been done before. And I'm sharing this with you because I want you to see how real this project is. You're asking me, what can we do? I want you to know that there is a vehicle that is already designed and built precisely for the kinds of things we're talking about in this conference today. And it begins by simply listening to the fields of the earth that we're talking about. Now, those images from 9/11, those were on weather satellites, and all the data in the past has come from, military or commercial satellites. The Global Coherence Initiative is building and deploying their own network of sensors that are independent from any military applications, from any weather applications, from any other corporate applications, specifically to understand our relationship to the earth. That's why they're being built. How do you feel about the fact that that's happening? I'm happy to hear that. Okay, let me share with you, this is a blueprint, very technical, for what a sensor looks like. Let me show you how beautiful they are when they're in the ground. When they are deployed, this is what a sensor looks like. Isn't that beautiful? Wouldn't you like one in your own backyard? I think we all should have them. Okay, this is the first global GCI site. It was in Northern California at the Heart Math base, right in Northern California. Right now, there are additional sensors, and here they are. There's one in Northern California. This one is in New York. This one is in the UK. This one is actually in Saudi Arabia. This one is in New Zealand. This is the existing network. However, it is incomplete. When the network is finished, this is what we would like for the network to look like. Now, I am not a HeartMath employee. I want to be very clear. For transparency, I'm on the steering committee. I'm on the steering committee and the Science Advisory Board for this project. I believe in it. I think it is a powerful opportunity for us to put into play what we've always talked about for 40 years, for us to become in our hearts, in a way that is effective, what we choose to live in our lives. It's a vehicle for us to do that. Every day, the sensors send back data that looks like this. This tells us about our relationship to fields of the earth. The shiny places, the really bright places are where there's more activity. Each box is a 24-hour day. This was Christmas Day. This is the month of December. The system took the day off on Christmas Day. That's why you're seeing that. All right. It's all about this experience of heart-brain coherence. We don't have to have a tragedy to create that coherence. We can do it when we choose, on demand, if we understand the relationship between heart-brain coherence. After this break, I'm going to invite the Vice President of HeartMath to come on this stage and share with you precisely what that means and lead us through the exercises that are going to take us into a global coherence experience in the next section. So stay tuned for that. But the idea is, if we can create the feeling in our heart that becomes a 0.10 hertz frequency, that's optimum coherence for you science people out there. This is what I've learned from those ancient traditions. This is what they're doing in the monasteries of Tibet and in the highlands of central China and the Andes of Bolivia and Peru and around the ceremonies and all throughout the desert Southwest and the Americas and the Aboriginals. What that does, if we can create that feeling, we know it's good for us. And we're going to talk about this more right after the break. But what I want you to know is this, is that there are people all over the world that are learning what have learned what you're about to learn this afternoon. And it is through this network of hearts that I believe we have the ability not to impose our will, not to manipulate, but rather to participate, to tip the scales of balance and peace in our favor. If you want more information about this project, I want you to have this website, glcoherence.org. I have some time left. And what it tells us is this. It tells us that our small personal choices of the future, of peace, of well-being, of healing, become our collective answer to our time in history. Where are we going from here? I don't know. I can't tell you what tomorrow looks like. But what I can tell you right now is the stage of the world is set. And that all possibilities are on the table. Are we going to choose cooperation or competition? What we're really asking is, are we choosing love or fear? And you are making that choice. This is what I wanted to say to you today. But we've covered a lot of ground in kind of a left-brain way. And you've been really patient with allowing me to share this with you in the way that I have. In the last few minutes that I have, I'd like to do this from another perspective. So if we could begin at a low level, can you begin at CD number 2, please? I'm going to invite you to shift gears a little bit. You can put your notebooks down. You're not going to need your notebooks for what we're doing here. Can we begin CD number 2, please? At low level. Put your notebooks down. You can uncross your legs. Can we bring our lights down a little bit? CD number 2, track 1, please. Track 1. Okay, bring it up a little bit, please. A little bit more. Feel like we covered a lot of ground today? Was it meaningful? It makes sense? Okay. What I'd like to do now is share with you from the perspective of our ancestors. Everything appears to lead back to our hearts. It's so interesting that technology leads us full circle right back into our hearts. And it's through our hearts that we'll make the choice that tips the scale of life and peace, cooperation in our balance, in our favor. So I'm going to invite you to do what our ancestors have done for so long and allow the sounds of a musical instrument to carry you directly into your heart. In one of the most ancient and sacred ways that we have with us today. In the traditions of the ancient, in the forgotten peoples of our world, there's always been a belief that each time the breath of a human passes through an instrument of the earth, when the breath of a human passes through an instrument of the earth, in that moment we reenact the most sacred, the most holy act. It's the union between heaven and earth, between spirit and matter, between the past and the future, all that has ever been and that which is yet to be, all come into the present in our hearts. And I invite you to allow your awareness to follow the sounds into your hearts and allow your hearts to open in the safety and the presence of the sounds. All of our ancestors. All of our ancestors are with us now. The voices of our ancestors are with us now. The wisdom of our ancestors is with us now. The peace of our ancestors is with us now. The healing of our ancestors is with us now. Is with us now. Is with us now. The spirit of compassion, show us the way. Spirit of compassion, show us the way. Show us the way. And I invite you to take one more deep breath. And open your eyes if you haven't done so already. It brings this portion of our program to a close. Are you in your hearts right now? Okay, stay there. Don't move. In your hearts as you take your break. And when you come back from your break, I'm going to bring an amazing man up to this stage. And we're going to take this to the next level and join people all over the world with precise techniques to create the coherence in the fields that connect all life. Thank you very much for this 2 hours together. I love you all. Take good care. Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Let me thank Sheena. Thank you. Thank you.